When you've been watching Formula 1 for as long as I have, or even some other viewers of this channel have, you'll have seen a lot of drivers come and go. Some have been GOAT tier, some have been very good, some have been quite successful, but some never reached the lofty heights that were predicted when they were coming through the junior categories. In this driver/team retrospective mini-series, I've looked at the two main mid-grid guys in Trulli and Fisichella, at least from my lifetime anyway. But I've done a fair few other drivers as well. Trulli and Fisichella were incredible in mid-grid cars, but when they got their big break in a good car, they were either over the hill or they had a teammate who was younger, faster and just overall better. And actually that happened to both of them, didn't it? Because they were both teammates of Fernando Alonso. Trulli in 2004 and Fisichella in 2005 and 2006. But Fisichella did win in a Jordan and won the opening round of the 2005 season, so there's that, and Trulli won at Monaco in 2004. And if you're new to the channel, don't worry, there's plenty of other drivers that I've done retrospectives on, like David Coulthard, who I think was the first in the series. Then you've got the likes of Damon Hill, Mika Hakkinen, who admittedly did become champion, and you've also got the likes of Alesi, Berger, Irvine, Vettel's Ferrari career, De La Rosa, the list continues. And I still need to do the likes of Alex Wurz, Nigel Mansell, Mark Webber, Kimi Raikkonen, Nico Rosberg and Martin Brundle. And the thing with Martin Brundle is, we need to put some respect on that guy's name. He had a 12-year career in mid to back of grid cars. He got into Benetton when Schumacher was there, he got to McLaren when they'd fallen off, and he won Le Mans and Daytona, all with his feet smashed in after wrecking at Dallas. But today I've got a driver who should have achieved big, but for whatever reason, he didn't. So we need to look into why he didn't achieve. Today, I've got the story of Quick Nick Heidfeld. And Heidfeld was a driver I remember watching in the juniors, because around the time of the late 90s, F3000 had highlight packages on ITV whenever it was on. I don't think it was the actual day of the race, I think it went up a couple of days after, but either way, it was on the telly. And I remember seeing this guy called Heidfeld doing quite well, driving what appeared to be a miniature McLaren of all things. And this is his car from the 1998 International Formula 3000 series, now called Formula 2. It is, pretty much, a small McLaren, because Heidfeld had Mercedes backing at the time, and West Competition, who ran that team, was doing so as the McLaren Academy team. Heidfeld was partnered with Nicolas Minassian, and the two could not have had more different seasons. Heidfeld was qualifying and scoring well as grabbing poles and wins on his way to finishing second in the standings, finishing behind Juan Pablo Montoya by just 7 points. Minassian, meanwhile, could only manage 5 points over the course of the season, and the team replaced him with Bas Leenders for the final round of that year. But Leenders didn't take the start of the final race to give Heidfeld a free position, because fuel irregularities forced Nick to start from lower down the grid. The following year, in 1999, Heidfeld would have another crack at the F3000 title. Minassian was replaced by Mario Haberfield for the year, and with Montoya off to kart, Heidfeld was the favourite for the title. Other drivers on the grid who went on to have decent pro careers include Justin Wilson, Bruno Junqueira, Stefan Sarrazin, Oliver Gavin, Romain Dumas and Gaston Mazzacane. Although Marco Apicella and Roberto Fontana were also on the grid in F3000 in 1999. Fontana last raced in Formula 1 in 1997 and Apicella back in 1993. Sort of. Heidfeld won at Imola, Barcelona, Manicourt and the A1 ring to take the title, winning from Jason Watt by a massive 29 points. It was utterly dominant after coming so close to Montoya in 1998, and Heidfeld might have done slightly better if not for that fuel irregularity. But, you know, it is what it is. McLaren definitely had a talent and they might be able to do something with him in the future. He'd need a couple of seasons to bed in if and when he got to Formula 1, but they had a decent product. And actually, that reminds me of a picture that was published in Autosport around the start of the 1998 racing season. This picture has often been referred to as the McLaren family portrait and features 8 drivers and 4 cars. Back left of this shot, you've got Nick Heidfeld and Justin Wilson with the Formula 3 car, even though Heidfeld went to Formula 3000 for 1998. On the other side, back right, you've got Ricardo Zonta and Nicolas Minassian. In the middle, at the back, is Mika Hakkinen and David Coulthard, with the car that won the Drivers' and Constructors' Championship that year, the McLaren MP413, with Hakkinen becoming the world champion. At the front is a go-kart with these two 13-year-old kids either side of it. One of them is Lewis Hamilton, who ended up having, well, he had an alright career, didn't he? And the other kid is a kid called Wesley Graves, who I would say, unfortunately or sadly, is the only driver out of those 8 that did not have a racing career. he'd be dropped by McLaren at the end of the season, and, well, that's kind of the harsh reality of these kinds of things. It's like the footballer in the Manchester United setup or the Barcelona setup and, well, never playing professional football. It's just one of those things. And if you ever read the story about Wesley Graves, it's quite sad in a way. So at the end of 1999, Heidfeld graduated to Formula 1, but he was going to be thrown straight in at the deep end, because the F1 car he ended up in was, well, not going to be fun. It was the 2000 Prost car, a car that was underfunded, slow and unreliable. Now, Prost's troubles I've talked about in their own dedicated video, but the Peugeot engine was underpowered to the point where Prost thought that Peugeot had exaggerated the engine figures and Peugeot had to prove their claims on a dyno. And actually, I need to look more into how Peugeot was supplying subpar engines to the 406 BTCC car in the 90s, because that's a story I've heard a couple of times but not really found any detail on. Needless to say, it was a baptism of fire. Heidfeld finished 9th on debut in Australia but then lost the engine in Brazil. His hydraulics failed at Imola along with the lazies and then lost oil pressure at Silverstone. He was disqualified at the Nürburgring for being underweight, lost the engine again at Canada, was involved in a collision with a lazy at the A1 ring in Austria, and then had alternator failure ruining his race at Hockenheim. The electrics went at Hungary, he lost the engine for a third time at Spa, spun off at Monza, had broken suspension at Suzuka, and crashed with Diniz and De La Rosa at Malaysia on the first lap. Prost would score no points and would not be classified in the standings as a result. Prost's sponsors all disappeared, and the 2001 season would be the old Ligier team's final season in Formula 1. But there was going to be light at the end of the tunnel, because Peter Sauber saw something in Nick and hired him for one of the seats in 2001, as his 2000 drivers in Diniz and Salo were moving on. Peter had assembled a young hotshot team for the 2001 season because Heidfeld was going to be partnered with the young Finn, Kimi Raikkonen, much to the dismay of Sauber shareholder Dietrich Mateschitz, who wanted Enrique Benaldi in the car. But it was actually somewhat miraculous that Raikkonen was there at all, because his lack of experience was under the microscope by the FIA. As it was, both drivers were there, and the car was overall better than the Prost had been. But then again, there are Alfa Romeos from the 1980s that were more reliable than that Prost. Both drivers scored in their first race, Heidfeld managing 4th with Raikkonen finishing 7th but got promoted into 6th after penalties were applied. Both cars retired at Malaysia, but then Heidfeld got his first podium in Brazil. Kimi meanwhile suffered another retirement and a third successive retirement at Imola, those being transmission, a spin and steering issues for reference. Heidfeld got another point at Barcelona before finishing 9th at Austria, but then it was 3 retirements for him in a row, these being at Monaco, Canada and the Nürburgring. 2 collisions and his transmission failing. But I don't think the 2 collisions were his fault. Either way, Heidfeld and Raikkonen were somewhat even, with there being only 3 points between them come the end. At the end of the year, with Hakkinen retiring, it was expected that the McLaren and Mercedes junior driver would be the replacement, that being Heidfeld. But Ron Dennis elected to do a like-for-like replacement, one Finn for another. Instead of his own junior driver, Dennis put Raikkonen in the car for 2002 instead. It was seen as a strange decision at the time. Heidfeld was, as mentioned, a McLaren junior. He'd also not just beaten Kimi by 3 points, but also outqualified him 10-7. Although they were even in the race stakes. That's only taking races where both cars finished. You also have to factor in that Raikkonen had 5 non-finishes versus Heidfeld's 1, so you could go by the fact that Kimi might have been leading when those DNFs happened, but I can't find the data on that. As one person wrote on Reddit in regards to that family photo that I was talking about before, a lot of people talk about how Hamilton f***ed Wesley Graves on the track, but not a lot of people talk about how Heidfeld got f***ed by McLaren. Is that something you agree with? Do let me know in the comments. It seems that Nick's career was set from this moment, to never be in one of the top cars on the grid. He'd stay at Sauber for another 2 years, being partnered with Felipe Massa for 2002 and then Heinz-Harald Frentzen for 2003. He'd beat Felipe in qualifying 11-5, 8-4 in races and finished with 7 points to Felipe's 4 come the end of that 2002 season. However, in 2003, he'd beat Frentzen 10-7 in qualifying, 6-2 in races, but Frentzen beat him in points, including getting a podium. It was 13-6 in Frentzen's favour at the end, and Sauber was lining up Giancarlo Fisichella at the end of the season, as well as bringing Massa back for 2004. Frentzen would be done with Formula 1 at the end of that year, later becoming one of the good guys on Twitter, with his daughter seemingly proud of her dad's achievements. So it looked like that Heidfeld was going to be out of a drive for 2004. But if he did get a drive, it was not going to be in one of the top cars. He was going to be down near the back end of the grid. After doing some tests with Jordan in the early part of 2004, EJ was convinced enough to take on Nick. And I think taking on Heidfeld was also to try and sweeten the deal with the rumoured Mercedes acquisition. Story goes that around this time, Minardi wanted to dip into Bernie's fighting fund, which was a pot of money that could be used to help bail out teams while they waited for certain things to happen, like sponsor deals to land, cover the cost of a sponsor pulling out, or otherwise keep a team afloat until the end of the season, maybe while they find a buyer, just as an example. Because all the manufacturers wanted Minardi gone simply because they wanted to spend even more money, EJ supposedly voted against giving Minardi this money to help keep him in Merck's good books, but the Mercedes deal never happened. So Heidfeld had to make do with the yellow junk box that was the EJ14, and he'd be joined by Giorgio Pantano. But the car was merely an updated 2003 car that, despite being a race winner, was underpowered, with Jordan blaming Ford and Cosworth for the lack of horses, since the Jags had way more power than the Jordans did. Thankfully for Jordan, this was the second year points were handed out down to 8th place, so if the cars could stay alive while people dropped out, they might be able to get something. And with Nick's talent, that should have been doable. And it was. After a shocking opening portion of the season with 4 retirements in 5 races, Heidfeld managed to get 7th at Monaco and got another point at Canada. But in that race he finished behind Timo Glock, who came in for that Grand Prix because Pantano's sponsors hadn't paid up yet. In total, Jordan got 5 points that season, which allowed them to finish ahead of Minardi, but EJ sold up at the end of that year. And it's a shame really, because I consider Eddie to be the last of the privateers. He managed to hold on while everybody else sold up. So by the time the 2005 season rolled around, Heidfeld had this reputation of a bit of a journeyman driver. He'd driven for Jordan, he'd driven for Sauber, he'd driven for Prost. Now he was moving on to yet another team, but at least this next team should be able to do well. He was going to be at Williams, who still had BMW power. He'd won the seat in a shootout with Antonio Pizzonia, and would be driving alongside Mark Webber, who had also impressed in previous years, particularly in his time at Jaguar. But the FW27 wasn't up to the performance that Williams had enjoyed in previous seasons. Wins weren't on the cards, and even though the Ferrari dominance era had ended with this season, Williams couldn't maintain the winning a race per season streak that they'd been on since 2001. But that said, the car did allow Nick to perform quite well, with a 3rd place at the Malaysian Grand Prix and 2 more podiums at Monaco and the Nürburgring, where he also took pole position, the first of his career. But that would be the best the season would get for him, unfortunately. He had to pull out of the Italian Grand Prix due to being injured in testing, and then missed the rest of the season because he'd been knocked off his bike while out cycling, so Pizzonia took over for the rest of the year. Heidfeld was often in front of Webber that year, so it makes you wonder how much better his season would have been if he hadn't been injured. I'd completely forgotten about that. BMW would part ways with Williams at the end of the 2005 season because they just bought out Peter Sauber's outfit. Heidfeld went with them over to this new BMW Sauber team because, well, it ticked the box for having a German driver, and that's kind of where things would pick up, but as it picked up, something else was about to happen. Now, I've done the BMW years in a dedicated video, so I won't spend too much time on things here. Heidfeld and Villeneuve formed the driver pairing for 2006, and Nick utterly demolished his world champion teammate, and Villeneuve departed the team after the German Grand Prix. So in came Robert Kubica to replace him, and Kubica actually did quite well. And this apparently caused a bit of a sore spot considering the media was hyping Kubica up when it had been Nick that had been doing all the heavy lifting that season, including getting a podium at the Hungarian Grand Prix. A similar thing had apparently happened in 2001 and 2002 while Nick was at Sauber. Teammates being hyped up, but Nick was beating them. In 2007 things picked up slightly for BMW. Heidfeld got another couple of podiums, including a 2nd place at Canada where Kubica wiped out in that massive crash, and also came 3rd at the Hungaroring for the 2nd year in a row. But the 2008 BMW was the best BMW of the lot, shown by Heidfeld getting a number of 2nd places and getting points finishes at most of the races he took part in. On 7 occasions he didn't score, and he finished every single race that he took part in that season. But the problem was, after Kubica's win at the Canadian Grand Prix, BMW decided to dump all its resources into the 2009 car. And where BMW could have been even better off and Heidfeld could have been better off, he came 6th overall, which was 1 position down on his 2007 finishing position. And he finished behind Kubica, who came 4th with 15 more points. In 2009, Heidfeld managed to get another podium, but the problem was the BMW just was not good enough, even though they'd got a bit of a head start compared to some of their rivals, particularly McLaren and Ferrari. But McLaren and Ferrari started the season better off despite starting their cars later because of the fight through 2008, but you also had Brawn and Red Bull in the mix as well. As such, Heidfeld went from 6th in the standings down to 13th. For 2010, the rumours were he was going to go to the new Mercedes team to be alongside Rosberg, but Mercedes chose to sign Michael Schumacher instead. Negotiations were also going on to maybe and finally take him to McLaren, but they eventually signed the new world champion Jenson Button. So, once again, he was out of luck getting into a big funded, big history team. So in the interim, he took on the role as Pirelli's test driver, and in doing so, he vacated his position as the head of the GPDA. But in late 2010, he was back. Pedro de la Rosa had left Sauber and Nick was back in for his third spell with the Sauber team, through its various guises. He came back for the Singapore Grand Prix and finished out the season, but wasn't retained into 2011 because Sauber had decided on the lineup of Kamui Kobayashi and Sergio Perez. This would leave Nick out of a drive again, but the unfortunate rally accident for Kubica gave him another opening. His final season in Formula 1 would be the 2011 season. Although he managed to score some decent points and also got a podium at the Malaysian Grand Prix, he left after Hungary to be replaced by Bruno Senna. Heidfeld was one of those drivers who had the tag of potential star, but never got to show if he really was a star. When he got the chance to be moved into a competitive McLaren, Raikkonen went there instead, almost dooming Nick to a career in mid-grid cars that never went anywhere. This was until he got the BMW drive in 2006, which started out okay because, well, he was beating a world champion teammate, but then Kubica arrived, and it was clear that there was a newer batch of drivers coming through the ranks. Heidfeld had come through the system around the same time as Alonso, Raikkonen, Button and Massa, who all won or got very close to the title. But by the time he found himself in a half-decent car, the next lot of star drivers in Hamilton, Kubica, Rosberg and Vettel were about to materialise, even if it did take Rosberg a bit longer to get going. So history shows him as being more like a Fisichella or a Frentzen or a Perez. Absolutely mega in a mid-grid car and could extract results and get podiums for some extra points and media interest, but it never really went any further than that. As such, Heidfeld still holds the record for most podiums without a win. Lando Norris did overtake Heidfeld briefly, getting 14 podiums without a win at Australia in 2024, but when Norris won his first race at Miami in 2024, the record was handed back. Similarly, after the British Grand Prix of 2025, the record for most races without a podium is now with Adrian Sutil. And I should do a video about him at some point because of the whole nightclub thing. The next drivers in line for most podiums without a win are, for reference, Stefan Johansson with 12, Chris Amon with 11, Roman Grosjean with 10, and Jean Bera, Eddie Cheever and Martin Brundle with 9, with some others. The only current F1 drivers on that list are Lance Stroll, who has 3, and Alex Albon, who has 2. Then you've got Hülkenberg and Antonelli, with just 1. Someone said in the Red Bull video I did about a week or so ago now, that everything that's happened in the last 24 or so years is all because Kimi Raikkonen signed with Sauber instead of Enrique Bernaldi, which is what Dietrich Mateschitz wanted to start with. As such, Mateschitz went and took over Jaguar, made that Red Bull, and everything went as it did. But for Nick Heidfeld's career, it also involves Kimi Raikkonen. Kimi Raikkonen goes to McLaren instead of Heidfeld, and Raikkonen has the career he had, while Nick had the career he had. Would that have changed things if Nick had gone to McLaren? Answers on a postcard. So then, a look at the career of Quick Nick Heidfeld, another of the mid-grid stars of the early 2000s. If this has been an interesting look at a driver who didn't achieve what his junior category performances would have suggested, then do give the video a like so I know I've done a good job. And for more stuff from this channel, get subscribed and also get the bell on so you never miss out on anything else that I do around here. Massive thanks as ever go out to the rad lads over at Patreon who continue to support me at a more personal level, and if you want to help with the picture purchasing piggy bank and keep the lights on around here, there'll be a link to Patreon in the description, along with links to Discord, socials, affiliates and any other bits and pieces you might want or need to know. Or there's super thanks for one and done donations and memberships so you can Patreon without the Patreon. So until next time, I've been Aidan Millward, have a great day wherever you are, and goodbye.